Hi everyone, this is me and Sally again in another session where we continue our courses, our sessions into learning C Sharp, how to express C Sharp, how to mirror our ideas in a programming language like C Sharp. And in the process, we're also building about all the CRUD operations, building APIs, building UIs, building all the components someone may need to be able to stand up an application that's of use to someone somewhere. And in the last time we talked, Sally and I were talking about, adding in validations to the modify. What do you think about that, Sally? Do you think this is already implemented? This is already in place? I can see it right here. That looks like it's going. Tell me what you think. Go ahead.
Well, this is the one that obviously it's passed because it used the same validation.
Yes.
So, the part that you mentioned, without changing the validation code at all, and find a way to see if I can find to make it fail first. I wasn't successful without
no worries.
But
no worries. So let me show you how would I have done this, right? If I were to go and implement this, I would have done something like this. Let me share my screen here with you real quick, and I'll tell you exactly what we can do to make sure that when we are, everything has to be test driven, meaning that you can't just add code in the system unless this code is test driven, right? What I would have done this. I would have gone in here and said this. So let me pull in latest from here real quick so I can get your changes, Sally. Here we go. Let me revert this. And then let's pull latest. There we go. And then let's go into, so if I pull latest from master and I go and pull your changes in here, so you have the modify, well done, this is all good. Here's what I would have done. I would have gone and did something like this. I would have went to the modify book first. And instead of calling validate book, I would have said validate book is not null. So this way I basically moved out the additional validations that you added in, because what this function is doing, it's calling two functions, right? It's calling validate is not null and validate.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. I basically just use this one. So this way.
So I thought I am not allowed to change that one either.
Oh, you're different. It's your code. It's literally called Sally's library. It's got your name on.
You're saying the unit test like without changing anything on the implementation.
Oh, that's my bad then. No. That's literally what we want to do. We want to go and say, okay, if this is the case here, that means if I go to my unit tests in here, Sally, and I run this, the modify option should fail. The modify option should fail. Let me show you here. Oops, I need to rebuild. Give me a second here. Also, let me increase the font on my screen here so people on their phones are able to read what I'm doing. Just a second here. Show more options. Display setting. It's here, and then 100%, 175. Here we go. All right. Let's do this. Okay, you can still see Visual Studio. I'm hoping, right? Is the text a little bit bigger? I'm hoping, at least on the. Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So now I have a good failure, and this failure says should throw validation invalid book exception on modify if the book is invalid, right? And that's all the rules that you have. See, that's how I would have done this piece. All right. Now that it's already in place and everything is done, that's okay. Let's go ahead and, basically, revert this, and let's go back to the master branch. Okay. What's in Hassan's pocket for you today? I have some stuff to talk to you about today. Here's the deal, my friend. If you go into this add logic in here, you see these values that you added in here? These values that you added in here, you added them manually, right? Which basically means that these values, anybody could literally go up in here and copy this, just copy this code, and they can go into your logic, and then regardless of whatever book you're throwing in here, they're gonna go create their own book. See, they're gonna create, fictitious, like this. So they're gonna go create their own book like this, and they're gonna pass that fictitious book to both the insert function, and if you run the test, check this out. If you run the test on add, let's see what's going on here. This is deep clone. This is all good. Nothing has changed. Let's see. Expected the book to be. Do you have a GUID? You have a GUID in here. So let's just, for all intents and purposes, let's say this is here's the only thing. See, the only thing that's failing here is the randomization that you have in the ID. But if you didn't have that randomization, like if this randomization wasn't here, and if I go back into my add book in here and take away that randomization in here, your test would pass like this. See, invalid book, correct. Oh, because the ID, hold on. Because you have validation rules, that's right. So let me do this. I will make it GUID.NewGUID like this. And I'm gonna go into this business logic here, and I'm gonna say the ID is the same ID as the book.id. So I'm stealing the ID that's coming from this book. Now this guy is gonna pass. Check this out. Oh, not yet. Let's see. What else do you have that's generated randomly? Let's see. It's saying, wait. Did I not save in here? Let's just make sure this is right. Let's see. Expected the actual book to be, and this is the book that you passed in, and this is your input book, and we went into that input book and we went and said, give me that book and copy that ID. Maybe. Found. Just one moment. Let's see. This is all this book, and it's honoring the reference on this side. And I can pass this guy in here like this. And let's run this test again. This guy passed. Why did this guy pass? This is a problem, right? Because this problem here basically says that you can make up your own element, right, that matches one for one the element that you have in here, and everything will just go through, right? There's other aspects of this, but this is one aspect. The problem here is that I'm trying to point out here is that you had to write the data by hand. And writing the data by hand here, meaning that anyone, no matter who they are, can come up with their own fictitious value to pass into your test, right? Like they can basically match the values that are passed in to your function. That's of course a big problem. That's a huge problem. Why is that a problem? Because that means that whatever is being passed in here, right, is not necessarily what's being validated and tested and all that kind of good stuff. You know what I mean? Especially when it comes to situations like in here, we're lucky a little bit because we're matching the references. But in some functions, things can get really tricky, especially if you're passing a primitive type, that you're passing in. Like for instance, let's say your function is going and saying, pass in a string name, for instance, right? If your test is saying, create a random name, call it Sally, and just pass Sally in here, your test will pass, but that's not true. What's not true is that the value that was passed in here is not the same value that was passed into your broker. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's a problem. The problem in here is that anybody could mess around with your logic and still have the test pass, without actually validating that the actual object that was passed in is the same. Why was I able to do that? Because you wrote these values by hand. You actually wrote all of these values here by hand. So we need to figure out a way, Sally, to go and say, instead of creating an object by hand like this, I want to create a random object, randomized. Okay, I want to put random data in it. So there is no way for anyone to go in and be able to hard code the data that I'm passing in. Go ahead, questions time.
No, I got that.
Right? The other reason why we want to randomize this data in here is that sometimes there are values that we may not pay attention to the fact that it might break our tests. And these random values are the ones that are going to tell us whether these tests, can withstand random values or not.
Mm-hmm.
So now bear with me because this is the fun part. There's this really nice library called Dynamics. Let's go to Dynamics. It's called Object Filler, Dynamics Object Filler. And what this Dynamics library does, it helps us generate random objects for whatever object we throw in for known types. I'm going to install this library in here real quick. And then I'm going to show you what this library does. Here's an example for this library. I'm going to just put this as a fact in here just to show you how this library works, but this is not a real test. This is just void dummy test. Test. Now check this out. I can go in this test and do something like string random string equals new mnemonic string, which is a type that's coming out of this dynamics library that's helping me do things. So I'm just going to go here and say assert true. This is just for me to kind of hold the test. Now check this out. If I go and debug this test, every time we call this function, it will give me a completely new random string. Like a string that I can't just type by hand. So check the value here. It's just garbage string. See? Hold on, let me just see why it's not. Yeah, there you go. Do you see this? GICO, GI, just random. And if I go back again in here and run this again, like this, now I'm gonna come up with an entirely new string.
Interesting.
Right? The same thing applies to many, many things. Like if I go here, I say, hey, I want a random first name like this. You can go here and say names, real names dot get value. Now check this out. Like for instance, I'm testing a system and the system is basically supposed to help us, test first name, middle name, last name. Look at this name, first name here, it's gonna be, check this out, Carrie Nash. If I go back again and go like this again, it will tell me Molly Lowe. It comes up with a bunch of names. And the same thing applies to all kinds of different types. I can go and say, give me a random integer like this, and they will go and say, okay, int range, from minimum 2 to maximum 10. Give me a random integer between 2 and 10. I can go and say, give me a random city, I think, and then this would be addresses, I think. City, yeah, city name like this. And you say get value, I'll give you a random city. You can go and say, well, give me a random email like this, and we'll say email addresses, and you can just go and say get value. So it generates random values for any type you have. Okay. Now, in order for this to apply to our case here, I'm going to go and create something called a filler. So it's a filler method. Let's go here and say static filler. And this filler method is going to give me back a filler object for the book type. So it's going to try to generate a random book for me. Are you with me? So I'm going to go here and say create book filler. This is one function here. And I'm going to go and say var filler equal new filler. So here's my filler for a book. And I'm going to go at the bottom here and say filler dot, but just give me that filler back. The only thing why we create this is because sometimes this really awesome dynamics library doesn't know how to generate everything for everything. Like it doesn't know all the types in the world. So sometimes we have to tell it, like for instance, the date time offset, it doesn't know how to work with it. So we can go here and say, okay, for date time offset in here, like this, hold on a second, I want to go and tell it to use get random date time offset. This is a function that I haven't written yet, but it's a function that I'm about to write. So that's fine. This function here, private static date time offset get random date time offset. And what this guy is going to do is literally going to go and say return, new date time range. Date time range is also coming from dynamics, but we're just mapping it into a random date time just like this. And then get value. Check this out. So this guy now gives me back a random date time offset. So I'm basically, go ahead.
Got confused here. So what is the filler exactly? So filler is create something that is not in the library. Is
Yeah.
No, what is filler? That's a create book filler. So what is the filler itself?
A filler is basically an object that knows how to create one or many random objects of the type that you pass into it.
Okay.
So it can be one or many that you can create out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we want to retrieve all the books. This filler is going to help us with that.
Mm-hmm.
Now check this out. How am I going to use this filler? I'm going to go here and say static book and then create random book. See, I'm saying create random book, and then I'm going to create the filler, and then I'm going to say create. So out of the filler, create a book. If I want multiple books, I can go here and say count and give me 10.
Mm-hmm.
See, so this filler is the object that helps us create random objects of the type that we're targeting.
Okay.
This way, we are programmatically exponentially improving our situation, because in here, when I say random book, instead of trying to say something and description and all that, then you're going to have to think about what to do. You shouldn't have to think about that. Now you just go and say create random book. Now, is this actually working though? Does it actually work? Like if I go up in here and say this is my book, and I'm going to put a breakpoint at this point here, and I'm going to do Control RT. Let's see how that works.
What is Control RT doing?
Huh?
What is the Control RT doing?
Control RT, it runs the test that your pointer is at in debug mode. Okay, so look, when I hover over random book, look what happens now. If I expand this guy, look at the name, the author, title, ID, in stock, title, all of these things have changed, right?
Right.
And every time I go over here, it'll give me a new one. Look, if I go now, it'll give me a brand new one. So this way nobody ever can go into the logic, your logic here, and tells you like they can't guess what the incoming is going to be ever. Why? Because it's randomized.
Mm-hmm.
It's randomized, right? It basically means that, whatever book you're trying to retrieve here is not gonna, if you try to write this book by hand, you're not gonna be passing this validation and insertion. Okay, so this book here, this randomizer here is really important because it basically, your test is still, let's see, throw if contains, correct the errors and try again. What validation did you put here? That you must have put something in here that says the Boolean has to be true. Yeah, this one. We should probably get rid of this one because this value here is weird. But even if that value is not true, like we want a randomizer to work with it, we can go down here and say, well, on type Boolean, always use true like this. Use true like this. Now, if I run all my tests, if we really want to enforce the value that says when we insert a new book, it has to be in stock, that's okay, but we have to agree on that. So do you have any, so this is really what I wanted you to just kind of understand. You have to generate random values for your tests, because if you don't do that, what's basically going to happen, anyone can guess the values of your tests. And we don't want that to happen, right?
Right.
Now, what that basically means is that we need to go and say, in these cases here of validation, we don't have to generate random books. This is good for obvious reasons, right? This is perfect. The ones where things are not perfect, though, is this part here. Like in here, when you say retrieve by ID, right? See, the retrieved book that you have by ID is just an empty book. So we need to kind of do that. Okay, so we need to kind of take care of that. Any questions about randomization?
So, no, about randomization, I'm clear on that. So if I don't want to like add the true, so how would I, should I delete that, you said? I didn't get.
I'll tell you what the assignment is. There are two things. Number one, you need to create we need to modify all our tests, to basically say, that the book coming in true value is not mandatory. So that rule that you have in here that basically says that in stock has to be true, that's not true.
Can you go to that?
The invalid is invalid in here.
Okay.
Yeah, this one, we need to remove this rule. Okay, that's the first thing we need to do. And we need to make sure our tests confirm to that. So you're going to start with a failing test first, right? So how are we going to start with a failing test in here to make sure that we have a failing test that compels us to remove this rule?
Yeah.
What do you think? So we could start with the validation, right? What can we do to this test to make it fail because of the validation rule that for in stock?
Okay.
I'll let you think about it. Okay, so that's just the first rule. The first rule is that we need a failing test that tells us, hey, you don't need to validate in stock. That's number one. And then number two, we need to apply the create random book in the happy paths. That's for the modify and retrieve by ID.
So for the first answer, like, in the invalid, we didn't have no return. How about if we would have Boolean as a return?
In the invalid, like in the let's see.
Is that the hold on?
Like in here, this guy.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to get rid of the rule. But we need a test that fails first that makes us need to remove the rule in order for it to pass.
Okay, let's think about it.
Just think about it. So that's that one part. And then the second part is that, you remember that little aspect that we talked about randomization, right? We went in here and said, hey, create random book. We need to apply this to both the happy paths for modify and retrieve by ID. Does that make sense?
Right.
All right. So what I'm going to add for you here is basically just the example. So this is here. I'm going to go here and say this is a code rub, right? And this is here, use truly random book. This is the one part. And then on your part is to apply that across all, but also at the same time, you need to figure out how to remove this rule. And once you remove this rule for the Boolean, you can remove this piece as well. Like once you remove the Boolean, check that you have and have the test passing, now you can remove this piece as well. Do you have any questions?
No, I'm good.
All right. Until tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow. Just take all these things in, see, all the randomization, why we do the randomization. Okay, we want to make sure that nobody can guess our stuff, but we also want to allow our tests, because we're testing behaviors. We're not really testing values. And if you're testing behaviors, the values don't matter, then the values need to be randomized, unless it's a very specific case, one-by-one case for, switch cases and whatnot. But other than that, you want to leave it open like that so you see what the randomizer is going to come up with and maybe expose some issues in our code. All right. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you everyone for watching us. I hope this was useful for you, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you so much, Sam.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye.